Well, I think we can start. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Diana Preti. I'm the Director of Education of Miami New Drama. For those who are joining us for the first time, Miami New Drama is a theater company located in the heart of Miami Beach, founded by Michelle Hausman. One of our principal characteristics is that we mainly present world premieres. We present world-class work by American, Latin American, and international artists, designed for Miami unique multicultural audience. By sharing work where cultures, dialogues, and communities intersect, we want to reach audience as diverse as this city itself. Today, we have the honor to present our masterclass with Pablo Gershanik. He is an actor, a director, and a theatrical pedagogue. He has graduated from the École Internationale de Théâtre Jacques Lecoq. I don't know if I say it right.
Very well.
Yeah, thank you. He is an acting member of at least 3 important theater companies based in France. But Pablo is here today because he is also the creator of the intimate model methodology. That for us, it has been like, wow, blowing, because it's a unique artistic process that that helps to transform trauma into art. And before Pablo takes over the screen, I want to invite all of you to post your questions. Below you can see a section that is Q&A. You can put there all your questions or comments. And after Pablo finished his presentation, we are going to have time to make all the questions that you want, all the comments, and we'll talk a little bit. Our America is living really hard times, so thank you, Pablo. This conference is going to help us to create a narrative now that is a lot of things happening. So thank you and welcome, and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Diana. I would like to thank Miami Drama and the community, the theatrical community that beholds the whole effort and the whole quest that Miami New Drama beholds. And well, I am very, very honored to be able to share this space with you today. English is not my mother tongue, but I hope everything will be absolutely understandable for you. If there is something that is not, just hold your hand and let me know. And I'm very glad to be here. And if you agree, we can start. Is that right for all of you? Excellent. So let's go. Are you seeing my screen? Diana, can you help me with that?
We can see it perfect. If you have, okay.
Excellent. So,
great.
The idea of today is to have this masterclass, but every time I come on stage or I share a theatrical moment or I teach something, my idea is not that I am going to deliver you something, but this is an exchange. This is a moment of dialogue. That's why we make theater. That's why we create artistic invitations to dialogue, to share the space with the audience. So please be my guest in sharing the space. So thanks a lot. What does it mean to reconstruct a tragedy? What is it for a society, for a family, for a community, for a person for the whole world to reconstruct a tragedy, to react to a tragic fact, to react to a traumatic event? Is it getting back to the origins? Is it the possibility of revisiting, like the matrix of the horror, as if we would be an archaeologist, like getting back and visiting the remains of this tragic event, this tragic fact, like in an intimate archaeology towards our story? The possibility of dissecting it, of getting in a documentarist way to our story, reconstructing, dissecting, dividing, ordering every ingredient that composes the horror or that composes the pain that we have. What are the ingredients of this horrific recipe, of this structural moment that creates a nightmare, that creates this event in our memories, that creates a myth, that creates so many layers in what we do, in what we think, in what we dream? Or perhaps is the other thing, to reconstruct a tragic fact, to reconstruct a tragic moment, is also to reconstruct ourselves, to reconstruct in a way of, to tell ourselves the story and to tell the story in a different way, representing it, changing it, what it means to represent our story. What do we do when we represent? What's the possibilities representation provides us? What are the topics? What are the stories? What are the things that we need to represent in order to be able to talk about, in order to be able to create a dialogue with the audience, in order to understand that a story that we share is not our story, just our story, but a common story? Or perhaps it's both. Is the possibility of creating a documentation, a documentary, and also a transposition, also a recreation of what we have done, or what happened to us. As I said, as a family, as an individual, as a community, as a collective. Diana has already introduced me, but in case you don't know who I am, I just wanted to share a little bit what I do. I have like 3 different hats, let's say. I'm an actor. I used to work, and I still work for theatrical and circus companies as a clown or as an actor. I direct theater, and at the same time I teach at the university, at the National University of Buenos Aires, and now I'm also working in France. I've been living in France for 1 year and something now, so I teach in French institutions. This is the city of La Plata. This is the city where I was born. Is there something that you realize or you can observe about this city? Is there something specific about the city that calls your attention, that makes you think of something? La Plata is the capital city of a region, a Buenos Aires province region, and it's supposed to be a perfect city. What does it mean, a perfect city? It means that it has been planned before it was built in 1882, I'm sorry. And so they were thinking, an Argentinian architect and a French urbanist were thinking of a perfect city. La Plata is one of the the examples of cities that had been created in the paper and then created. And you have Brasilia, you have Santa Cruz, you have some others. And La Plata is a very specific example of the way Argentina was imagining the society, the Argentinian society, and the Argentinian country in general at the late 19th century. So this city is a city that has, like, as you see, two diagonals that are crossing the city, and it's like a grill. It's like New York in the way that it has numbers, street number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, and then from 32 to 72, and so it's a perfect square. And so you have every 6 streets, you have an avenue, and you have a park, and everything seems to be fantastic. And in the middle of that, you have like a column in the 52nd Street. You have like a column of every public building. So this is like the historical acts of the city. You can see it from the sky, and it's perfect. And you can see it in different postcards, and it gives you an idea of the way we thought Argentina could be. You see, a very European city. You have an impressive museum, natural science museum. You have a fantastic football stadium. We are Argentinians at the end of the day, and a fantastic train station, like recalling the European immigrants and the European communities that we have in Argentina.
In the chat, they're saying that it's a little bit like Washington, D.C.
Is it?
Yeah, Alice is saying a little bit of Washington, as Washington D.C.
Yeah. Sure. Well, it could be also as Washington D.C. because it's a bureaucratic city. It means that the administration of the state is settled there. So you have the Congress, and you have the ministries, and you have like every public administration's building there. And this is Mario Gershanik. This is my father. He was born in La Plata in 1944. This is Mario's family. This is one day in the zoo with his parents and his grandparents. That's another important day. The wedding's day with my mother, Graciela. And that's another important day. The day that I was born, his son was born. Mario was a pediatrician, he was a doctor, and he was very, very engaged in the fight for the public health in Argentina during the 70s. I think you know, but in case you don't know, Argentina suffered a slaughter during the 70s, a massacre, first by the fascist right-wing movements killing the opposition, the left-wing's opposition towards the fascist regime. And then since 1976 with the coup, we had the dictatorship that had that created like a bloodshed in the whole Latin America, but Argentina was specifically touched by the Condor operation and by this fascist dictatorship that touched the whole South America. As I said, Mario was a political militant. He was one of the visible faces of the struggle for the political, for the sanitarian and the public health in La Plata. He was directing the residents of the pediatric hospital at that time. So he was, as I said, a very visible face of that struggle and of that movement. And Mario was also a sportsman. He used to play rugby, and he used to play in a position that in Spanish we call it ala, wing, and in English we call it winger. I don't know if you're familiar to rugby, but well, in Argentina is an important passion after the soccer, the football soccer. This is our house. This is where the Gershanik family used to live, in the center of the city in downtown in La Plata. La Plata is a tiny city. Now we have 500,000 people, but at that time it was even tinier. So that means that everyone knew everyone, and that it was a very convivial and a kind of huge neighborhood, but just a neighborhood. In this city where Mario was born, he was also murdered. He died in 1975. At the little hours of April the 10th, 1975, about midnight, Mario was arriving from a meeting, from a political meeting. He was in pajamas just after eating something, and he, my mother, and myself started hearing a huge noise, bringing us to the attention that the door of the house was being exploded with an axe and with machine guns. With this man commanding the operation, Carlos the Indio Castillo. He was the leader of the gang, of a fascist gang, very known in La Plata as the AAA, Anti-Communist Argentinian Alliance. Everyone knew the operation of these gangs, not just sheltered and covered by the state, but armed and even paid by the states, mercenaries paid by the state, because they used to have these cars, the green Ford Falcons, without matriculation plate. So everyone knew that these cars belonged to the Anti-Communist Argentinian Alliance. And they used to have this kind of machine guns called Ithaca. That is a kind of machine gun that the American army created to invade Vietnam some years before. Mario was a sportsman, as I said, and he was a very healthy and young. He was 29 years old, and he was, well, kind of strong man. So when they decided that they wanted to take him outside of the house, to murder him somewhere else, to create like a clandestine platoon and to shoot him, he resisted. He defended himself, he defended his family, he defended the principles he was fighting for, and so they could not take him out. We had 10 men heavily armed for the war, and one man with the pajamas and his dignity struggling to each other, and they could not take him out. So they had no other chance and no other possibility but murdering him with 80 bullets in front of us. He shot to him 80 bullets. That is one of the biggest questions that I still make to myself. 80 bullets. What does it mean, 80 bullets? Why do you need 80 bullets? What do you do with 80 bullets? And how and why do you need, once again, 80 bullets to kill one unarmed man if you can do it with one bullet? This is the journal, this is the newspaper the day after April 11th. No one admitted and no one declared that they had done this crime. So it's a crime that until today has not been already judged. But so you had the Journal of La Plata saying this: a terrorist group murders a physician in this town. So you had an important strike that broke out that day, because by killing him, you were also like creating terror in different communities. The medical community, the left-wing and politically committed community, the sportive community, the Jewish community, because Mario belonged to the Jewish community of La Plata. So many different universes were like touched and frightened somehow by this crime. We went to exile, we went to Mexico, as much of the Argentinian, Chilean, Uruguayan, Brazilian, Peruvian, Ecuadorian communities engaged politically that had to flee their countries because that's the only way we could survive. So Mexico became our country. Mexico became the place where we were able not just to survive, but to live, and to live in an incredible way, which was sharing with the Mexican people, sharing with all these communities coming from these exiles, from these experiences of trauma, from these experiences of revolutionary movements, needing to create once again a vital community, a vital possibility of re-existing in a different place, in a different country. 36 years later, a friend of my father's, a journalist and a rugby player and a militant as he was, decided that he wanted to create a research, that he needed to research what happened to his friend, to Mario. And so he started research, and he started creating like a whole research. And so in 2011, he finally got one of the person that belonged to the gang that killed my father. And through this testimony, through the words of this man, he managed to reconstruct the whole structure of the gang. He called me one day. I was at that time in Argentina, and it was a very important moment for me because I had been a father a couple of months before. And so he gave me a ring and he said, I'm gonna publish something about your father. I'm gonna publish an article about your father. So through this article, these three men were taken to a trial. Once again, the Indio Castillo that is in the center, Pipi Pomares, which is the most important murderer of the band, and Boxer Lozano, which is the guy that thought that by telling the story, by telling the way they killed Mario, and they killed somehow around 100 and something person in La Plata, he could be able to be not judged. So these three murderers were taken to jail that day, well, to trial. And the day I saw the journal, I was seeing the faces of my father's murderers at the same time that I was seeing my father's face in the journal, and at the same time I was seeing my little baby's eyes watching me. So I realized that that was the time to work on this principle of paternity, that I needed to work on my father's story, and then I needed to work on my story related to what is a father and how, once again, can we talk about that. So a little time later, sometime later, I received an invitation from Haroldo Conti's Memories Museum in Buenos Aires. This museum of memory, is a museum that is settled in what was the École de Mécanique de l'Armée, la Escuela de Mecánica de la Armada, the Army's mechanical school, which is a place where the Marines in Argentina train themselves. And this place were the biggest and the most important concentration camp of the Americas. From 1976 until 1983, this was a place where the Argentinian dictatorship took more than 5,000 disappeared, missing people, kidnapped, tortured, forced to work as slaves. They were forced to give birth in that place. The babies were stolen, the babies were kidnapped, and finally they used to give them as loot, as a trophy to generals, to policemen, to people from the repression not being able to have babies. And that was the biggest prize over the enemies, to adopt, to be the parents of the these kids that until now, many of them grew up without knowing their own, well, the real identity. They were raised by these murderers, the murderers of their parents, obviously saying the version of the story that they have and not letting these people being in contact with their real and profound identity that they have. At that time, I created this project, 80 Bullets to the Wing. As I said, Mario was murdered with 80 bullets and he was a wing. So I decided to call this project 80 Bullets to the Wing, to create a pun, to work and to play between these two senses, the sense of a sportsman murdered, and also to talk about a broken flight, the flight of 3 generations, my grandparents' generation that had to bury their kids, my parents' generations that was massacred and slaughtered by this repression, and our generation, my generation, that grew up orphan and not knowing exactly what to do with this massive traumatic experience that this military power created in our society. The invitation that I received was coming from the visual arts department of this museum, and I don't come from visual arts. I'm an actor, and I do theater. But for me, it was very, very interesting to imagine that I could talk about Mario and that I could realize many different things of this story, of my story, that I didn't know by getting into this story in a detached way, in a parallel way, which is getting through the objects, getting through the visual universe of this crime, getting through another way of expressing, another artistic language that was not mine. And by not being familiar to this universe, to this language, to somehow create a challenge, to create the possibility of expressing through another language. So with my best friend in life, Julian Tehual, who's a painter and who's a musician, we spent 2 months in this concentration camp to create this project, this 80 Bullets to the Wing. So as I said, my biggest question, my biggest concern at the beginning was this question: what does it mean to reconstruct a tragic event, to reconstruct a tragedy? Coming from theater, you can imagine that the fact of creating a tragedy or talking about a tragedy is something that talks to me a lot. So I decided to reconstruct the city of La Plata the way it was in 1975. And the first thing that I did was to think of a model, like an architectural model, to reproduce this city in a scale. And this scale had to have the measures of my father. So my father was 1.84 meters. So I decided to create a space 1.84 meters size, 1.84 meters. And in this place, in this model, like the reconstruction of this perfect city, once again, you see. So I decided to create this model and to pass from the principle of a B-dimension, not just a map, not just a geographical approach to this city, but starting to imagine it in a 3-dimensional way. And you will see why, and you will see what happens to this passage from B-dimension to 3-dimension. So this was the first step, the construction of the model's construction. The model had different layers. The first layer that I wanted to work with was architecture. How was La Plata that day? What were the buildings like? What was what the La Plata looked like that day. So I recovered postcards from La Plata. The first thing that I did was recovering postcards from the 70s and creating from these postcards these three-dimensional buildings, these three-dimensional models where I could start to create little scenes, little live scenes with little toys, with little objects, with little characters. So, for instance, this is the cathedral, La Plata's cathedral, in the postcard at your left, and then the image that I created in your right. This is Natural History Museum, and this is one of the postcards. And so you see in your right, what I did, I started like to create this volume and to create this three-dimensional stuff. And it was very interesting because by talking to people related to psychology, to psychiatry, and to trauma, I started learning that the way we experience the images of trauma is always bidimensional, which means that we have always the same image of what happened to us, and that we have the tendency of stalking the image and facing the image always the same way. So we adopt the same role, we always have like the same posture towards the experience or towards the event, and it's also something that keeps flat in our mind, that has no depth, that has no like layers, that has no profound like these levels that every human experience has. So I started realizing that changing this bidimensional way I used to see the images, my mother saying the story, my grandparents telling the story of my father, that was not just a doctor, but the most incredible doctor ever, and the most incredible father ever, and the most incredible political militant ever. And obviously, in the story of this family, the need of creating a myth, the need of creating a hero was so present. That is something that I received, that I obviously inherited. But so by seeing the pictures of him, by seeing the journals, by seeing all this bidimensional approach, and by creating this change into this three-dimensional universe, I started realizing that I could change the image that I had in my mind about that story. Not just because it was starting to become three-dimensional, but also because by creating this object that could stand, that could be in balance, and that could stand by itself and not by myself holding it, I could start to realize the landscape that was around. All the different objects, stories, moments that were happening at the same precise moment. And so with this kind of wide panorama, with this wide landscape that started coming to me and to the model for the first time of my life relating to this experience, I could realize that it was something that happened in the middle of so many other things. So I started working also with everyday's life. So I recovered like many different moments of La Plata, that day, that month, that week, in different spots, in different situations, in different places, like through newspapers, magazines, personal archives, or collective archives, or public archives. So these are all pictures from La Plata. And I also wanted to work on the idea of the walls talking. What were the walls saying that day? And when I think of the walls, when I thought of the walls, I thought about advertisement, publicity, graffitis, political paintings, and everything that that day the walls were saying. So for instance, you have the advertisement of these falcons that, as I said, as you know, is the vehicle, is the car that the murderers use to kill my father. So this is the propaganda, this is the advertisement of that day. And then you had these zurdos hijos de puta, which means leftist son of bitch. And then you have like the different revolutionary movements, like painting walls in the image that you have on your right below. But not just crime, but not just political violence, but everyday life. The chocolates eaten by the kids that day, the most popular football player at that time, and also the Ithaca advertisement. As I said, this quiet and Marlboro country's universe is also the universe of the American army invading Vietnam and then giving these weapons to these mercenaries in the whole Latin America to finish with the subversion, the way it was called at that time by the fascists. Newspapers, magazines, everything that was happening that day. I realized, for instance, by reading the newspapers, that day was the day the Oscars were given. That was the day that Amarcord and Federico Fellini got the Oscar. That The Godfather's second part was, with Al Pacino, got the Oscar. And that in that week, for instance, you had on screen such an incredible amount of myths of contemporary cinemas, like Jaws, like Earthquake, like Barry Lyndon, like Odessa's Files, many, many, many films that if you love cinema, I'm sure you have seen. And well, that was also something happening at that time, obviously Vietnam's war. And this is Rolando Rivas. This is the most important soap opera that the Argentinian society had. He's a taxi driver and he's so poor, but he's so in love with her that she is so normal and so beautiful. But this is an impossible love. But finally, by driving this car and by driving this incredible romantic proposal from him to her, he gets the lovely Soledad, which is the name of the girl. Everything happening at the same time. This is 1975 in images. Films, political situations, sports, music. If you see, that was the moment where ABBA was rocking, and it's something unforgettable, isn't it? This is the political context of Argentina, a dictatorship, but not already officially established, but in power, but behind the scenes. Because this woman was still the president of the nation. She was the widow of General Perón, which was the most important political figure of the Argentinian and one of the most important Latin American figures of the political structure and the political universe of the 20th century. Some days before getting in power, they were still saying themselves loyal to democracy, to justice. And this is one of the last meetings they had to swear justice and to swear democracy in front of the president before getting the coup. This is the way it looked, the first version of 80 Bullets to the Wing. I was also creating imaginary space, which was this train surrounding and this train traveling around the whole city. And this train used to have a camera. So this tiny version of La Plata, this tiny version of the city, was something constructed with the images of the reconstruction, but also with my family's photos, with my family's letters, with my family's objects. And I decided to create like these different train stations. And these train stations were the train stations that belonged to my father. The rugby club, the hospital, the school where he was a student, the house where he lived and where he was murdered. And so all these different stations were filmed, were shot by this camera. And so this tiny universe started to be screened on the walls, projected on the walls of this concentration camp. And by projecting with this camera, with this GoPro, this tiny camera, because of the wide angle of the camera, something that was a revelation for me is that the audience surrounding the event started to be part of the frame, started to be belonging also to the frame. This is going to give you an idea of the way the camera worked and the way the portrait of the city was created. And you are going to see also the reconstruction of another layer, which is the sounds layer. So I decided to work on the sounds of the radio, the cinema, the theater, the political speeches that day, the advertisements. So if you listen to the music, these are the jingles of the radio that day. And in the middle of that, a political speech, a political moment, a statement that the president was saying about killing the opposition, about not letting these leftist communists approach and appropriate of the Argentinian democracy.
La nación, 20 segundos, final completo con locución. La nación. La campañola se come sola. Vaya, vaya, con Acrocel. A todas partes vaya con Acrocel. A toda moda con Acrocel. Fibra poliéster de Sudantex. Vaya, vaya, con Acrocel. A todas partes. Con corazón muy grande, grande y muy escuchar. Ha nacido por sincero.
Nosotros, Dios mediante, vamos progresando paulatinamente cada vez más, pero para que eso sea una realidad, necesitamos, como dije otras veces, ir cada día trabajando un poco más para ir produciendo más y llevar el país a donde le corresponde, como lo quería el general.
That was the president saying to all these who do not understand the rules, we are going to whip them with not exactly justice, but our fury. And that's what happened. So I want to talk about what happened to me by being in this place and by creating all this project, by being in contact with this traumatic universe that was given to me in this concentration camp. The first thing, as I said, is 80 bullets. I wanted to work with bullets. I wanted to work with real bullets. I didn't know where to get the bullets. I had no idea. I had never had in my hands bullets, so I didn't know where to get them. I didn't know if going to supermarket was going to work. You in the States, you have the possibility of going to supermarket and buying bullets and guns. We don't. So I didn't know where to get these bullets, but I wanted to work on this material. I wanted to have a bunch of lead in my hands to realize what is this bunch of poison? What is this bunch of lead like? What can we do with this bunch of lead besides the things that we know we can do? Can we do a mobile? Can we do stop motion? Can we do a sculpture? What can we do with this bunch, with this branch of lead? One day we were visiting this concentration camp, and one of the guides told us that that place that you see on your left up was one of the places where people disappeared, were tortured, and with a hood. And this place is called Little Hood. So by being there in this little hood, they told us, they showed us a printing machine. And they showed us and they told us that one of the things that the dictatorship used to force to disappear to do was like labors related to printing, translating manuals, writing articles, writing propaganda for the regime. The most important propaganda for the regime that the Argentinian dictatorship was created in 1978 when Argentina organized the Football Soccer World Cup. So there was a mission of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, and they went to Argentina to realize the way the human rights were happening at that time. So the Argentinian dictatorship created this campaign called Los Argentinos Somos Derechos Humanos. We Argentinians are right and human. And by being there, this guy told me, or told to all the people at that time residing in this museum, that this printing machine was the printing machine that they used to use to force these people to create these editorial tasks, these editorial works. And I was with a friend who's there in the photo, and he used to work with prints, and he used to work with printing machines. And he knew that I was looking for these bullets, and he had a brilliant idea. He told me, do you know that the lead that we use to create these linotypes, these little tiny letters that we write with, that we print with, are made with lead? And you know that this lead that they use to create these letters is exactly the same lead that we use to create bullets. And I said, I have no idea. Obviously, I didn't know. And he said, yes, not just to create these linotypes, but also to create these tiny soldiers made in lead to create these tiny puppets, these tiny objects for the kids. So I asked if I could use these linotypes that the Argentinian disappeared had used and the Argentinian dictatorship had used to create this campaign, and they said yes. So with the help of my friend, I realized that it was the thing that I had to do, which was not looking for the bullets or buying the bullets, but to create the bullets, to melt this lead, to melt this metal, and to create like a matrix, a pattern to create this bullet. So what you see there is my friend Rodolfo creating this matrix, this pattern, and in order to make the bullets. And what you see there is the bullets. I didn't know the way a bullet of an Itaca looked like, and by creating this model, I realized that it wasn't the typical shape of a bullet, but like a machine gun bullet, which means it's a hunting machine gun. It's not a machine gun for very professional shooters, but for dummies. So that let me know also some of the possible personalities and some of the characteristics that these murderers, that these mercenaries, this gang of killers had. They were not very professionals. They were just policemen, like people that corrupted and that had been fired from the forces, and that finally were absorbed by these irregular armies killing people in the middle of the night. The second thing that happened that day, and that is also a base of my model, was this bush. This bush is at the entrance of the concentration camp. The same guide that was showing us the whole place said, and well, you know, do you see this huge bush? Because it's huge. Do you see this huge bush? Yes. And so he said, you know that during the dictatorship, there was a cabin there where a sniper used to be, with the mission of shooting against anyone trying to do whatever. And so that was the place where the sniper used to be, in this cabin. And if you see inside of the bush, you are gonna see this cabin. We don't know how and why, but one day this little bush that was behind the cabin started growing and growing and growing up until the point that this huge bush swallowed the cabin. And for me, it was like the perfect metaphor. It was like, oh, an incredible gift that this space was giving me, which was this idea of a vital green, a vital plant swallowing and hugging and like fixing and containing this cabin of horror, this cabin of a sniper. And so this idea of a dam, this idea of creating a green dam capable of not letting this poison, not letting this story that had already empoisoned 3 generations pass into the 4th generation, into the generation of my kids, into the generation of our children. So what I decided to do is, getting back to my model, I cut some frames of the model, some streets of the model, and I went through this concentration camp to get plants and to get the soil of this place, and to put these plants fed by the bodies of the people that were buried there, to put them in this model, hoping that one day these plants are going to swallow this model the same way the bush swallowed the horror cabin. And perhaps one day these plants will allow the kids to resume the football match where the guns were. These are the presentations, and this was one step forward, because by being there, at the beginning I thought that I was not going to be part of the event, that I wanted just to create this model, and that I was going to put play on the train and on the film and the screening, and that was going to be all. But by being there and getting in contact with the audience, I realized that this was another step to create, that was the narrator, that this story needed to be told by someone, that it wasn't just an anonymous story, but a personal story. And by sharing this story, realizing that the fact of having a narrator is transposing this personal story, this intimate story, into something collective, that this story that at the beginning is just private can become intimate, when I say intimate, I mean something that can be shared with the intimacy of the audience. Something that is private is something that belongs just to myself, and that I close the door and I put down the curtain and I shut the space, and this is my space. But instead, something that is intimate can be shared with another intimacy, but it's not just about my story or the audience story, but about what we share. This third thing that we share, this intimacy that we share, which in this case is the modal, which in this case is the narration of a common story, the story of Argentina during the 70s. I started having such an impressive luck by realizing that I could start playing with this scene. This is the foundation of my life. This image, this moment is obviously the foundational myth of my story. And by giving to my father the possibility of standing, by creating these tiny soldiers with the lead of the campaign, by bringing these Hot Wheels, painting them and making them being these green falcons, and by composing all this scenario and by composing all this scene and by playing it for the camera and by playing it to the audience and by changing different details and by recomposing, I started realizing that even humor was possible, even laughter was possible, that I could improvise this story, that I could change this image, that I could imagine so many different ways of telling the same scene, depending on who was telling the story and whose point of view we wanted to talk about, and so on, and what was sounding at the time and what was being heard at the time. So for instance, I give you an example. So these 80 bullets that we had, the sound of these 80 bullets is still always there, but it's not the sound, the real sound, but the sound that I stole or that I borrowed from The Godfather. And the moment where these cars arrive to our house are not just the soundtrack of these Ford Falcons arriving to this place in La Plata, but can, this music, this score that Josh borrowed me somehow, or that I took from these films that were happening at the same time that single day. Something very powerful for me was the meeting with the survivors, the people having lived the experience of horror in that place. And by sharing this experience, people started to approach, to tell me, well, I was here and I was there, and this happened to me, and this has been done to me, and this is what I would like to, and so on. And at the beginning, just survivors that knew that this was happening at the museum, but little by little, different people related to the story of the Argentinian story, or even to my story. People saying, I used to be your father's nurse. I used to work with him. I used to play rugby with him. He brought me to the world because he was my pediatrician, and so on. So many different stories from people that I didn't know, that decided that they wanted to approach to visit this event, to say hello to Mario perhaps, or to me. So by being there, I started to realize that perhaps, or I started to wonder if this idea of a modal, to modalize, if I allow myself to create a verb, if it doesn't exist already in English, I started wondering if this idea of a modal would be something helpful for someone else, would be something helpful to talk about personal scars, personal wounds, or collective wounds. If bringing this tool that was so useful somehow for me to express my story, to talk about my story, if there was something that could be helpful for someone else. So I was in the middle of this kind of brainstorming, thinking about ways of responding, replying to personal, intimate, and collective pain through art. And I started searching what other artists would have done. And so I started creating like a quest, like a research about artists and this idea of resilience linked to art and contemporary artists. And I started finding so many different and interesting things that I'm gonna talk a little bit about. And one of the first things that was very inspirational for me was this art of kintsugi, which is a Japanese art. I don't know if you are familiar to it, but is something that I think is a fantastic metaphor. Kintsugi is, sorry? Kintsugi is the art of restoring pottery with golden power. The idea is that a piece of pottery that has been broken by an accident or whatever, normally we tend to think that is already useless, that is nonsense to keep it because it's broken and because it's not perfect. And what Japanese do is they not just re-stick it and they gather the little pieces, but they make this kind of scar with gold. So they let us know that this piece has been broken. And so society recognizes the wound, recognizes the scar. And by seeing this scar, this object is even more valuable, more precious than an object that has never been broken, and because it has reborn. And this is also a metaphor that for me is something that talks a lot about our capacity of become something wider, something tender, something bigger, and something more empathetic and more wise in a way, by being able to work with our scars, by letting know everyone that human wounds are everywhere and that human pain is something that is not just personal but social but collective. So these are some of the artists that I was inspired by. I think you probably know plenty of them or all of them. In case you don't, I also wanted to share with you some of these links and some of these references. So after the conference, I'm gonna give Viana a couple of pages with these links, so you'll be free to dive and to go through internet to see these references. One of them is Ai Weiwei, this incredible Chinese artist opposing the Chinese regime today, and always working in this kind of self-portrait in different languages, in different ways of portraying. And one of them is this idea of hyperrealism. He creates models and he reproduces moments of detention, moments where he was in jail or taken by the Chinese forces of order and kidnapped by them. This is a Cambodian film director called Priti Pan, and he creates something that for me is fantastic, which is, as you know, Cambodia was ruled by the Khmer, the Red Khmer during the 70s and the 80s. And something that happened is that he wanted to reconstruct a massacre, one specific massacre that he wanted to reconstruct in a film, in a documentary. And he started looking for one specific image that he needed to illustrate this event, and he didn't find it anywhere. He kept looking for it, and he could never find it, until one day that he realized that he didn't need this image anymore, but that he wanted to construct it itself. So what he did is he worked with the images, with the archives that he had found, and he created with these tiny carved little figures, he created this model. He created himself, he created the story of the story of someone looking for the image, and finally the film is the story of this quest. So he says, from the quest of the image to the image of the quest, the film becomes the story of this man, this artist, constructing the image that is not existing, but by being created by him, the image exists, and it becomes not just real because it's not real and it's gonna never be real, but absolutely true because it's the way it needs to be existing, that it exists. This is a group of choreographers, dance and film happening together, called Charleroi Dance, and it's a Belgian group of artists. They work with different layers. They work with dance, they work with film, with live and direct film, and they work with objects, and in a very simple way and in a very, very complex way, in another way. So they create these kind of live films and live choreographies all together. So you have these two layers of action and fiction in parallel. You can see the team creating the images, the film team creating the images, and the dancers dancing with the hands and so on. But at the same time, you see the final image. And by having this contrast, something very, very powerful is created within the spectator's eyes. This is Lola Arias. She's from Argentina, and she's a theatrical director, and she is one of the most powerful young directors and young artists in Argentina. She creates different documentary theater pieces, and one of them was this, called Minefield. And what she does is she works on real experiences, and for instance, in this case, she gathers 4 soldiers, 4 Argentinian soldiers and 4 British soldiers. As you know, in 1982, Argentina and Great Britain fought the war, the Falklands War, the Malvinas Islands War. And obviously Argentina was, well, the Argentinian army was beaten, and it was a massacre, one more massacre that the dictatorship in Argentina made suffer to our population. So what Lola Arias does is 30-something years later, she proposes to 4 soldiers, 4 English and 4 Argentinian soldiers, to gather and to reconstruct the way all of them lived war. And the game they propose to them is to become stunts of themselves, to reconstruct as if they were stunts of their own characters, of their own stories. They need to reconstruct in the theater what they had lived, being helped by the enemies, somehow to be like the extras and to be the supporting cast of the scenes they are living or they are telling. And so she uses, and they use also these models to reconstruct these scenes. This is a fantastic puppeteer, Neville Tranter. He's from Australia and from the Netherlands, and what he does with the objects is just incredible. He is just alone himself on stage, and he creates many stories and so many characters alive at the same time. This story, for instance, is called Schicklgruber, that, as you know, is the family's name of Hitler. real Hitler name. And so this piece is about the last moments in the bunker, and what he does is just incredible. And so for me, this idea of animation, this idea of an animated object, an animated primary objects and matters came alive. It's something that was also always inspiring me in the creation of the model. This is Máximo Corbalán. He works also with models, but he works also with human bodies. So as you see, these miniatures, these tiny bodies are settled in a woman's body. As I said, I grew up in Mexico, so the tradition that Mexican society, Mexican culture, Mexican tradition has related to death is something very powerful for me. And this is Gabriel Orozco. This is an artist that uses to work with this idea of death. And for instance, this piece, Black Kite, is something that is very, very powerful at the time, because he works with a real skull, and at the same time is the possibility of transposing, the possibility of changing an image that somehow is taboo for our societies. This is the work of Philippe Gentil. He's a French director. He is the director of one of the companies that I had the luck to work with, and he works with this idea of the stage as a place of the unconscious. He used to work not just as a puppeteer, but also as a designer and a creator of puppets. And when he was a kid, he had the traumatic experience of having in his little town the Nazis, and the French resistance killed one Nazi, and what the German army made later was burning down the whole town. So he escaped, he fled with his family to the mountains, and he says that he always remembers seeing this tiny house that they had just in fire, and he was fascinated as a little kid, as a 6-year-old kid, fascinated by the flames. So every time he creates a show, he works on this idea, and he always has this tiny house in flames, in fire, and this idea of a house where the Nazis are, and these tiny bodies watching these huge other bodies coming to bring the fire to town. This is Boltanski. This is Christian Boltanski, a massive and incredible French artist that is obviously worldwide renowned. And this is a work that he does. He and his family had suffered the Shoah, and this is an installation that he created with clothes, and it's called Persons. So you had like this machine coming to pick up these clothes and bringing them into the heights, and then letting them fall down and fall down, and by falling down you see this flight, and they finally create this huge mountain made of clothes of so many people that are not there. So this idea of absence and presence of the bodies. You are going to see some artists, some French artists also working with portraying traumatic experiences. These two artists worked in Charlie Hebdo, which is the magazine, the Farsi magazine, the humor magazine that had been attacked by an integrist terrorist group. And so these are the images of these two artists that just by chance survived the attack. They were not there at the moment that the group arrived, but they were able to see what happened, and they were able even to meet the murderers when they were living. So this is what they created, this kind of choreographic dance of this moment. This is Catherine Meurice. She lived this experience, and she decided to create a book called Lightness, and where she says, I could not live anymore the way I used to live, and I decided that I needed to change the way I saw life, the way I approached to life, and I decided to make the accent, to put the stress in three things, which were friendship, culture, and beauty, which were part of the same thing. So she created this book, Lightness, where she tells the story of this moment, where this transition that she had after the massacre of Charlie Hebdo. Many other different resources. Obviously, cartoons are a resource that in films, for instance, are so powerful. The way we introduce humor, the way we introduce this kind of naive universe at the same time that we talk about the most dangerous and complex topics humanity faces in our cultures. So this is a Marjan Satrapi and Vincent Parano, Iranian and French artist, talking about the role of women in Iran and the transition in Iran. This is Marcelo Brodsky's work. He's a photographer, and he was a student during the time of the dictatorship in Argentina, and he used to go to the biggest high school in Buenos Aires, and many of his friends were disappeared. So what you see this is the intervention of the photos of the classroom photographs that they had at the time. So he started writing notes and putting some different little messages talking about his classmates, and it's called Good Memory. This is another Argentinian photographer, Santiago Porter. He comes from a Jewish family. As you know, the Argentinian Jewish community suffered 2 attacks during the 90s. One of them was to the most important cultural and social center in Argentina called the AMIA. And so what he did is he started reconstructing the memory of the families by talking to them and by asking them to bring objects or clothes belonging to their familiar, to their relatives, to dead relatives. And so this, for instance, is the coat that Argentinian kids used to go to school. And so this talks about one family having lost a little member of the family. I'm also interested about new generations, how the new generations or the new languages are working today, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. One of these examples is this application for smartphones that is called Bury Me My Love, and it's the director of this French-German cultural chain station, well, a TV channel called Arte, and he realized that many important members of his audience were not watching TV anymore because they were in other different supports, and that somehow that they had very interesting contents that they wanted to share with the audience, but the audience were not able to watch TV anymore. So he realized by having a teenager daughter besides him that she was all the time inside the phone, the smartphone. And that was the time of when the Syrian war lasted, and that was a disaster. So he realized that she had no idea about this war, and so he decided to to go not against this universe of screens and these new tools that are screens and smartphones, but to go with. And so he created an application called Bury Me My Love that is like a role game in real time. So you are this girl called Noor, and your task is you are a Syrian refugee, and you need to flee from Syria and arrive in health to France, to Paris. And by having all these choices that you can have, and by having the help of someone who through WhatsApp messages helps you, you take either the good or the right or the wrong choice, and you can or not arrive to your place. And so he realized that his daughter became such a fan of this, and through these she was able to study or to realize the depth of the Syrian drama. This is another polemic and very incredible thing happening today, which is Ever Stories, created by Maya and Mati Kokavi from Israel. And they created an Instagram site about this girl called Eva, that is a real girl that used to live in Holland also during the 40s, that lived Shoah. And so the question is, what would have happened if Eva, the girl that at that time had 12 or 12 years, would have Instagram? How could this tragedy could be transmitted? And so by creating this Instagram site, the next day, this became like the trending topic that everyone was talking about, and it was very, very impressive to give to these new audiences a different tool to get in contact with this drama. I also worked with people that had worked with trauma. I normally get in contact with people coming from therapeutical languages, and this, for instance, is an art therapist called Melissa Walker. She works at the military hospital in Washington, D.C., and she works with vets. And these vets that are there and work with her tell all of them the same stories related to this PTSD, this post-traumatic stress disorder that they suffered by having lived the war. And they all say that one thing that happened to them once the war has stopped and they are back home is that they see faces all the time, faces of enemies, of friends, people they have lost, they have killed, whatever, and they are haunting them all the time. So they had tried many different things by talking with them, by giving pills to them, by having these many different ways of psychoanalysis, psychology, and nothing was working with this PTSD vets. And so she decided that, provided that they see faces, one interesting thing to try was to give them masks, what they call neutral masks, like a simple human face without any specific gesture or expression, previous expression. And so she gave these masks to the soldiers, and she asked them to paint in the masks everything they saw, like the faces they were seeing. And this is something they started doing. And these are some of the masks they created. And when I met her, it was very powerful for me, because I work with masks. I teach with masks. And by seeing these masks painted and created by these men, I was very touched, and specifically by the fact of her telling me that after painting these masks, the faces they were used to see, instead of coming 7 times a week, 7 days a week, started coming 6 and 5 and 4 until they vanished. Some other inspirations were psychiatrists, psychoanalysts, Boris Cyrulnik, Jacques Lecoq, which is an incredible pedagogue, theatrical pedagogue, a teacher, and Bessel van der Kolk. They work with this relationship between body, mind, trauma, this link between arts and science, and this idea of resilience. I was invited and I was awarded by French institutions to come to France to present 80 Bullets to the Wing. And it was very powerful for me to come here because by talking with these institutions, they started telling me, look, there is something about what you do, about this model and about the way you work with the model that interests us, because now we, French, as society, we are living very, very traumatic experiences related to the attacks, related to the migration, related to the riots, related to different things that our society is suffering today. And the question of how, through arts, we can react to that. What's the role of arts in recomposing the social tissue, in proposing a resilient way, is something that concerns us a lot. So it was very powerful for me to listen to that. And what I did is, instead of creating a second part of my project of 80 Bullets to the Wing that was already in my mind, taking the shape of a theatrical conference, I decided to create intimate models. I decided to create another art craft, which is a laboratory with 3 axes. My idea was to provide a tool, once again, as I said, to give somehow to a group of people, to a group of artists, to a group of people having experienced a traumatic experience, the possibility of accomplishing the same layers, the same procedure, the same different moments of creation that I had lived. And I created like 3 axes: representation, memory, and social tie. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about this. These are the structures that allowed me to come. L'Institut Français, the French Institute, the 5-4, which is a contemporary creation space in Paris, and different places in Argentina. And the first place, the first association I started working with was the Association Française des Victimes du Terrorisme, the French Association of Terrorism Victims, which is an association that works with providing legal and psychological assistance to the victims of the terrorist attacks of 2015 and 16. And so I had the opportunity of working with victims, direct victims of the terrorist attacks of Bataclan, of Charlie Hebdo, of Nice, of different different places. And so these are some of the structures that I created. These labs where people work through 1 week, one intensive week, sharing stories with different layers. The first one, which is representation, is the idea of how can we represent? We need something more than just a very powerful or touching story, but how can we create this metaphor, this necessary metaphor, this poetic veil somehow that we need in order to be able to detach from something that is so close to us that sometimes we cannot even see it or we cannot even talk about, but also to give to an audience the space of getting in touch with that, to swallow that, to relate to that, but not just in the way we see it, but in the way they can complete the image that we provide. So this is the first experience that we had in 2019 in Buenos Aires. as I said, you had this idea of representation. So we work in the first time of the lab, we work in creating a common language, a common grammar, which is given by this movement, this theater of movement, these masks, these objects, these gestures that we work through theater in order to represent, in order to transpose. Then you have memory, which is the creation of the models, which is bringing back the object, the rest of this shipwreck, the shipwreck that everyone having lived this experience, this traumatic experience had, and bringing these objects alive, recomposing, reconstructing the photos, the remains of the real rest of that in order to create these models. And finally, this social tie, which is we present the models, we share the models. First with a group that is creating with us. So we create our model, but at the same time you have 10, 12 people creating at the same time. So obviously, necessarily, we have a dialogue, a feedback, and it nourishes the way we create, the objects we have, the way we think, and the way we see our story, and the way we see other stories. And that creates an empathetic and a very compassive way of working. This is one of the things that touches me the most, and I wanted to share with you. And it's what I called poetic contamination, poetic pollution. This is the story of Susie. Susie is a 17-year-old girl that was kidnapped and murdered by the Argentinian dictatorship. His brother, Jorge, came to the lab, and he decided that he wanted to work based on this story, based on the kidnapping of Susie and the loss that it meant to the family. He had never talked about her after the moment of her disappearance. They never knew what happened to her, what happened to the body, and they never had the chance of having a mourning or having the possibility of a burial or to have this moment of grief with the body. So it's a mystery, and it's a silence, and it's a no answer what he has in front of that. He arrives and he brings all these photos that he hadn't seen since a long time. And he says that he wants to work with that, but he doesn't know how. And actually, he doesn't bring the photos. He sends me the photos through internet. So I print the photos and I bring these photos for him to give him the possibility of working with these photos. And he starts saying with his photos the story that follows. He says, my mother, when Susie was disappeared, she was absolutely touched by the fact of not having Susie there. Susie was a brilliant student. She was starting the university at that time. And she was so brilliant that one of the things that is impossible for my mother to surmount is the fact of not having Susie finishing the university, because she was the first generation going to go to the university. And so my mother used to go to the police stations and to the churches and everywhere to look for Susie, if she was there, or if someone could give some information about Susie's destiny. And obviously she couldn't get anything. But by waiting for Susie to come, what she used to do, this mother used to do, is she was washing every week Susie's clothes, and she was putting these clothes, this line to the sun to get dried. And Jorge said, and the most incredible thing is that Susie had this white dress that she used to take to the school with a little pocket. And in this pocket, Susie used to put the chalks that she used to bring from the school. She kept writing with the chalks that she brought from university. And he said, and this object was my fascination. I was absolutely full of these chalks. And one day, someone cleaning these clothes threw these chalks to the rubbish, and I could not see these chalks anymore. And that was the day where me and my family, we realized that Susie was not coming anymore, that she was dead somehow. All of the partners heard to that story and no one said anything. But next day, another participant, another person that was doing the laboratory, took the word and she said, so Jorge, I didn't want to interrupt you yesterday, but I want you to know that I go to the same university that your sister used to go, and I'm a teacher at that university, and this morning I went to this university and I bring you something that is a gift for you. And she takes out from her pocket a tiny box, a cardboard box, and from the box she takes some chalks, and she gives the chalks to Jorge, who starts crying. And he could not stand that moment. He didn't know what to do. But suddenly, by having these chalks that obviously do not belong to Susie, but somehow they do, he could stand Susie for the first time. He could bring, if you see where the circle is with Susie, you will see that is the first time that he can stand Susie by bringing these chalks behind her. And you have different spots where the chalks are, and these chalks are the base of the model, of Jorge's model. And so he could, for the first time, put Susie in a position that was not horizontal, that was not just standing still, but in 2 feet. And something incredible is that this other participant, this friend, not just brought these chalks, but these tiny objects to hang, these hangers for the clothes. And so Jorge went to his house. He took a couple of socks from his little son, and he put these little socks to create the clothes that belong to Susie. And this is the model that Jorge created with the help of Viviana also. These are laboratories in Paris. These are labs in Paris. This is a girl come from Bataclan. As you know, Bataclan is a concert hall that had been attacked by a terrorist group. She was with these 2 friends that day, and they were murdered by the bullets of the murderers. She wanted to make an homage to these 2 friends, but she realized that the only photo that she had was this, but she didn't want these friends to be seated. So we worked on reconstructing once again on this idea of restitution. She didn't have the bodies of these girls, so what we did is we worked on the outfit that they were using that day. The 3 of them were wearing the same outfit. So she came with the same outfit that they were using that day, and we made photos, and through these photos we put the heads, well, she put the heads of the friends into the bodies that she had borrowed and that she had lent, to the bodies. So this is a final image where she creates Bataclan, and where you have these 3 girls, 2 of them not being there anymore, but alive somehow by the possibility of this girl bringing this body alive. This is another idea of poetic pollution, and with this I'm going to finish. This idea is a woman that had lived the Algerian War. She wanted to talk about a moment when she was 7 years old, where she was stopped by the French army, and but she didn't have any photo, and she wanted a photo. So what we did is I asked her to come once again, dressed the same way she used to dress when she was 7, and we started researching for photos about little girls in Algeria at that time, and we created through Photoshop and through a photo shoot this third image that you have on your right, which is she integrated to a scene that could be her scene at that time. You have different images of people creating intimate stories, stories of war, stories of grief. This, for instance, is Mexico. So many other different topics started arriving: migration, violence, gender, mourning memory. So I started realizing that it was not just traumatic experiences in the way of terrorist attacks or political situations, but intimate and collective situations that our societies are living today. This is another example, a group of people having lived a terrorist attack from different countries coming to a congress in France. So 20 youngsters that I worked with, needing to create common and collective models. So very interesting to realize how a boy or a girl, a teenager coming from Israel, from Lebanon, from Morocco, from Algeria, from Russia, from Colombia, from different countries, had to share with people that possibly in another context they wouldn't even be able to talk because they belong to countries in conflict with each other, but they created together. And this question of what can we create together? Because we need to talk about our personal drama, but at the same time, our common drama. And these are the models that they created together. So I want to dedicate these models that we present every time in front of an audience in museums, in universities, in cultural centers, in theaters, to all these people that created, that allowed themselves and their audiences to reconstruct, to recreate a new way of telling a story. And I want also to thank you very much for sharing and for your patience and being with me today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you. I'm very touched, very moving by this. Well, we have only like 15 minutes, so please, if you want to raise your hand, Claudia can bring you in, or you can also type your question in the Q&A if you want to make a comment or a question. Well, Pablo, for me it's like very impressive that you decide like not to do 80 bullets part 2, but create like this methodology, like to research more about this methodology, because I think the concept of empathy, like to make more process to people that can have empathy for the suffering of others, is like very powerful. I don't know if you can tell us a little bit about empathy.
Sure. For me, this idea of a model has many different layers. The first thing, as I said, is this step, this passage from a bidimensional thing into a three-dimensional thing, which is when we have a traumatic experience, we are like always roaming and coming back to the same film, to the same image that we have of the film. And it's flat, and we cannot move with that. And by detaching, let's say, by bringing this to a distance, I can start seeing the landscape. And by sharing this story, I can start realizing that the model is not just being able to see my story 360 degrees around, but also to be in contact with other stories, to realize that this notion of drama is collective, is something that we can share. And it's not exactly the same way we live drama, but it's complementary. It's by sharing it that we can have a different approach. It's by by being in dialogue with some others, and by creating a concrete object, not just by talking, but by creating a tool, an object, something is going to be allowing us to be in this distance, but at the same time in this proximity to our story and to other stories.
Yeah.
So this is what I think is the most empathetic thing that we can realize, because it's not our story, it's something that we offer to an audience that can be the group that is sharing the experience with us, or that can be the audience that is going to come later to watch what we have done. But it's always this intermediation, this object in between. It's not myself, it's not yourself, it's what we create together.
It's great. Oh, we have Jordan. Sorry, Jordan.
Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, Jordan.
Hi, Pablo. ¿Cómo estás?
Bien, ¿cómo te va?
Muy bien. But I will ask my question in English, disculpe.
Sí, yes.
Pablo, I am a writer, and I am curious if you have ever used any of these ideas or these techniques in theater, and if you could suggest if there is any way to use any of these ideas in writing or
Sure.
narrative.
Sure.
May I
Sure.
give you an example of something I am thinking about?
Sure.
So I had a friend a long time ago in New York City when I was
Hi,
young.
Jordan. Is there a chance I can see you?
They have to.
Let me see. I don't know how to do it. Sorry.
Just because I adore to see the faces and the stories I talk to, but
Oh,
Okay, Jordan. Yes, I send you the notification. I think we're going to see you
okay.
any moment. You have to there.
Hi. Hi.
hi, Jordan.
Thank you so much. So
Hi.
I had a friend when I was very young in my early 20s in New York City who was killed by the police. He did graffiti in the subway station, and the police arrested him. There were 7 of them, and they took him into a van and they strangled him and beat him, and they brought him to the hospital. He was in a coma and he never woke up. And he was not a close friend. He was someone I knew a little bit, but we shared some moments and we were part of a small circle of artists and punks and people like that. And he was Black. He was a Black kid. And even though we were not close friends, that experience has always been very hard for me. And when I tell people about it, I get very emotional. And I wonder why, because he wasn't my brother, he wasn't my boyfriend. But whenever I think about him or tell that story, I get very upset. And so I am writing about that time, the 80s in New York City. And so I'm thinking there were wonderful times, but I'm also thinking, why was his death so important to me? Why is it still, almost 40 years later, still so traumatic to me? And trying to figure out how to, I'm writing about it though, because that's what I do. So,
That's why
sorry if that
perhaps
was a long question.
That's why perhaps you are a writer, because you have these questions. And these are the questions that make you be an artist, I think. And the notion that sometimes these questions have no answer, but bring more questions. And these are the questions. That's why for me the most important thing is, what does it mean to reconstruct And to reconstruct means somehow to be able to go to that image and to reconstruct ourselves, which is to recreate, to reimagine a new way. I don't know what a model is. I know what helped me to work. But a model can be a novel, a model can be a sculpture, a model can be a poem, a model can be a recipe, a model can be a rap, can be whatever. What I do is I share a method, which is a kind of step-by-step procedure in order to give you like layers. Like, I don't know how to say when you throw a stone to a lake and it goes like, pim, 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 pim.
It skips. You skip a stone.
Exactly.
Skipping
So
a stone.
by this skipping procedure, I think something happens. And answering again to your question, I realized that you have so many different ways of creating, and that at the beginning I thought that this object, these models, were just for artists having lived traumatic experiences. And by doing many different laboratories in different countries and different cultures, I realized that it's not just that, but emblematic experiences, and anyone can do it. And something that happens is that by sharing your story with people that are very professional in some language and very amateur in another language, or this is something so rich. And I realized also that this idea of a model is just a trigger. It's a trigger to create shapes, narrative shapes. That can be theater, that can be a novel, that can be, is just, okay, go to the scene. Okay, are you in the scene? Okay, and who's there? And what happens there? And who's in the neighborhood? And who's in the other neighborhood? And who's in the city? And who's in another city? And what's going on in another city? And what's going on in another country? And what's going on in the world? And what's going on referred to sound? And what's going on referred to the walls? And what's going on referred to the political headlines that day? And so by creating this kind of cacophony, this kind of symphonic universe, you are in front of so many different points of view, because you can decide that you are going to say the story of your friend through the eyes of the mother of one policeman that created this crime, through the eyes of her little daughter, through the eyes of a witness that was there, through the eyes of whoever, through the eyes of yourself, that you don't even know why is that story touching you that much. And I can tell you that is because he's beholding something that intimately is touching you, and you don't need him to be your sister, your brother, your cousin, your love. It beholds human drama. And human drama is just 4 or 5 stories. The rest are variations about the same stories. This is why we do theater, and this is why I borrow to Hamlet's father's ghost and my father's the possibility of being together, and I steal to Hamlet this to be or not to be in order to dialogue with my ghost, because it's the same story somehow, even if it's not, you see? So to answer you, I'm working with different theatrical companies, for instance, that want to talk about a subject, a topic, and this is the way we investigate this topic. We research, we look, we dig into the topic, and different shapes, different expressions can come to surface. And then it's going to be up to you to take the pearls that you have created in order to compose your necklace, the necklace you want to compose.
We are going to bring Jill, that also want to talk. Welcome, Jill.
Hi, Jill.
Sorry, I don't have a way to show my video.
Don't worry, Jill.
I wrote my question and it kind of backs up to everything you said. I teach trauma writing in a maximum security prison. We have very limited art tools.
Mm-hmm.
We write, but I think this model would be fantastic, even in its barest form, minimal. Could you comment on how I might expand the writing with illustration, perhaps?
Sure. The procedure is so simple. As I said, I'm not a visual artist. I'm an actor. And so I work it with cardboard. I work it with a cutter. I work it with glue. I work it with corks. And little by little, I started developing this idea of passing from, once again, B-dimension into 3-dimension. For me, that's the step, the most important step to, because if I show you this, for instance, that is, let's say, whatever object I have, this object, this map, you see, if I put it like this, you are going to have a way of seeing it always from the top, always B-dimensional. It's a photo, but when I do this, suddenly I start existing. I appear. So all these layers that you create by giving to a body the possibility of standing alone by itself, and by creating all these different landscapes, sound, image, movement, interaction with the objects, the possibility of transforming the image is fantastic. And you don't need anything. It's just a couple of Hot Wheels. You realize, you see, it's nothing. It's something that you can find on your cupboard, and wherever, in your kitchen, with the objects of your kitchen. I propose you to talk about September 11th. I propose you to talk about a crime that changed your life forever. And you will realize that these objects are much wiser than any sophisticated tool that we could have, because they have the possibility of metaphor. And what we need is to create metaphors. We don't need to talk really realistically about things, but we need to talk truly about things. And the difference between reality and truth is that truth is something that we allow to be true. It's something that we trust on. It's a system of science that we give the authority, we rely on. And by that, and by sharing that with the audience, they become true. It's a fiction at the end of the day, but it's a healing fiction.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
helpful.
Pablo, we have 2 minutes and 3 questions. It's a challenge. Okay.
Let's go. Let's go.
Okay. Megan, Pablo, what surprised you about the reactions people had to the Plata exhibition?
What surprises me?
What surprised you?
One night there was a woman coming from Spain, living in Spain, from La Plata, but she was living in Spain. She was invited to see a concert, and so the person that was going to the concert with her told her, "Look, there's an artist from La Plata also exposing. If you want to go, you're from La Plata, perhaps you can see what he does." She arrived to the place, she saw the model, and she became pale as a piece of paper. And she said, "I was there that night. I was a little kid. I was 7 years old. I was with my family, and I remember the moment where I started hearing the noise of the axes blasting the door, and my father kept us behind the curtain, and we saw the whole crime behind the curtain, and I will never forget that." And that was the moment where I realized that my story was not my story, that that was a social story, that every story, every personal story is a collective story, it's a social story. And by realizing that she was facing her story, something allowed me to think that there was something to help with by bringing this tool to other people.
Georgina, how would you suggest starting to do something like this? There is so much trauma in the city of Philadelphia where I live, and I wonder how to even begin.
What's the age to begin?
How to begin?
By gathering a group. It's something we need to do together. It's something that we don't do alone. The most important thing to fight against tragedy is a chorus, is a group. Is the only way we can say a tragedy. That's why the Greeks understood that we need to create a chorus. By creating this chorus, we say in English?
Yes,
this
correct.
chorus, we can talk. And even if it's just one who talks, it's supported by the group. And this is something we need to do. We need to bring the word, the possibility of talking to the people, of sharing the experience. Art comes later.
Okay, and the other question you can complete is the process always individual? Did you ever have a group of artists working collectively on one person's story, or many together, or their stories, on their stories?
I have had people working on their own story together with other people, and groups of people, 4 or 5 people creating one common model based on different stories. But there's always this notion of collective work, which is, for instance, now we're going to create a group of models, a laboratory, a non-presential laboratory next week. And the idea is, even if every one of us is going to be at home, the idea is to create this gathering, this group, and by this federation, we're able to create, but we need to be together.
Well, Pablo, thank you so much. We have a lot of questions. Maybe we have another webinar with you. If you enjoy the class, you can donate to just texting to the word MIND to the number 56512. We appreciate very much. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you for this. We are living a really hard moment in the US, and I think that all of the people that were here with you